4 years on the circuit without getting paid anything. In fact, you're losing money because you're paying for your travel expenses, and then you get somewhere and you don't get paid for it. And this is why you'll find a lot of comedians, particularly in the UK, are from quite wealthy backgrounds or privately educated, because they have rich parents who can help them out, put them up in a flat, and they don't have to work during the day, and they escalate much quicker through the ranks. But if you come from my sort of background, you can't do that. You have to have the job, and then and you have to. It's like having two jobs, and so you have to really care about it. I mean, my advice is always that I do believe, although it comes with that insecurity, if it is a vocation for you, you have to do. I mean, for me, I couldn't have done anything. It is a genuine vocation for me. Even if I were making no money whatsoever out of comedy or writing, all the rest, I would still be doing it because I would feel unfulfilled if I were not doing it. I think there's something also quite. I mean, I take your point about the practicalities of living and the business of living, but my God, I think depriving yourself of your vocation can be so soul destroying.
No, it is. Well, I've spent a lot of time studying creativity scientifically, and the first thing that's useful to note is that creativity is not common. I mean, everyone isn't creative. That's wrong. Yeah. Some people are very creative. A minority of people are very creative, and I mean, it's a continuum. But you don't get creativity till you get up to the point where what you're doing is original, and that's very difficult. So it's a minority proposition, and then of those original people, there's only a tiny fraction that can make a successful financial go of it, because it's just, you have to be creative, plus you have to have some sense for marketing and sales and business, and you have to be reasonably emotionally stable, and et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very difficult. But if you are creative by temperament, well, that's you. And to not do that is to not be you. It's like asking an extroverted person not to be around people, or an agreeable person not to engage in intimate relationships, or a conscientious person not to be driven by duty. It's like, that's what you're like. And so, you're stuck with it. It's a double-edged sword, creativity. It's vital, it's entrancing, it's necessary, it's transformative, it's disruptive, but it's a high-risk, high-return game, and the probability of failure is overwhelmingly high. Even if you're an entrepreneur and more practically oriented in your creativity, the probability that you'll make money from your innovation or your invention rather than other people is very, very low.
But you need to find a way. I mean, it's also very difficult if you're a creative person to a lot of creative people don't think in practical terms. They don't think in terms of money, actually. They're hopeless. A lot of them I know are hopeless in this.
No, they also tend to be casually contemptuous of that, to regard it as practical concerns as selling out. It's like, you should be bloody happy if you have the opportunity to sell out.
So I think that the ideal is to find a way to pursue your vocation, but have one eye on the reality that, you will have to earn money somewhere or another.
Yes, I agree.
And I think it's that's why I think I'm lucky insofar as with Titania, I hit on something that had commercial viability, but it was very true to what I desperately wanted to do. And I think that's so rare. I think some of the stuff I've written, some of the plays I've written, for instance, I don't think would have any commercial success whatsoever, but I wrote them because I needed to write them. And some of them didn't even get on, and maybe one day they will, and that would be great. But what if
well, just think what you have to accomplish, though, right? You have to have your creative endeavor aligned with market demand at exactly that time.
Right. It's impossible.
It's very, very unlikely.
Actually, that's why I always say don't attempt to anticipate the zeitgeist, because you won't. The best thing an artist can do is do what they believe and hope, because a lot of it is luck.
There's a technical literature on that too. I mean, what you do is continue to produce ideas. And it's a Darwinian competition, essentially. They're like life forms, these ideas. And now and then one will find a niche that it can thrive in. But the best way to maximize your chances that niche will manifest itself is to overproduce. Because, I'll give you an example. I answered a bunch of questions on Quora. So that's a website where anybody can ask any questions and anybody can answer. I answered about 50 when I was playing with Quora. And one of them was a list of everything people should know, of things people should know in their life. And I derived my books out of that list.
Yes.
It was disproportionately successful. Most of the answers I generated got virtually no views. But it must be hundreds of thousands now. But even before I wrote the books, it was tens of thousands. But
Yeah.
had I not written 50, I wouldn't have got that one. The other
Right.
49 failures, so to speak, were the answers weren't necessarily worse. They just didn't hit the zeitgeist like that answer did. And
I think that's a great piece of advice. Overproduction, because it's the same with the Beatles. They look like an overnight success. It's because they've been playing endlessly in those dingy clubs in Europe. You know, before it happened, you produce
they
as
say
much
it
as you
takes
can.
10 years to become an overnight success.
That's it. So of most of the things I've written have done nothing and gone nowhere and had no success whatsoever. It's just but the one thing occasionally when it hits, that's what sustains all the rest of it. And
it's also why creativity is continues to be selected. Let's say from a biological perspective, it's like that's why I said it was a high risk, high return game. Almost everything you do creatively will fail, but
Yes.
now and then you're disproportionately successful, and so that keeps the whole game going.
You didn't have any sense, did you, that when you put the lectures on YouTube that it would explode in this way? I mean, that
Not
wasn't
in this way. This was completely. I'm still shocked constantly by my life. I'm shocked out of sanity by my life. I just can't. This is why I asked you about Titania. You know, you get at the center of a whirlwind like that, and there's something very surreal about it. And I mean,
Yeah.
I keep getting hit by surreal things, and it's very hard to wrap my head around it. Like this Red Skull episode was just one of many equally surreal occurrences, but
Yes.
no, I had no idea. I knew I was working on something important back when I was in my 20s when I wrote my first book, and it was out of that all my lectures came. And I spent 15 years working on that book, and I worked on it about 3 hours a day. And so I thought about it all the time, and so I knew there was something to it, not necessarily because they were my ideas, but because of the people who I had read and delved into while I was writing the book. I knew the ideas were significant, and I could see the effect of the ideas when I was lecturing on my students. So I had some sense that there was something vital, that I was involved in something vital, but.
Sure. But had you uploaded those videos a couple of years before or a couple of years later, you probably would have missed the zeitgeist and nothing would have happened. You know, I mean, it doesn't matter. I always think with any kind of creative endeavour or intellectual endeavour, it doesn't matter how good you are in a sense. It has to be good and the timing has to be right. And like you say, if you just keep, I think persistence is it. If you just keep doing it, not only does your craft get better and you are, if it does hit, you're in a position to
There's
be able
no
to
doubt.
handle it.
Look, if you okay, so in scientific literature, the hallmark of impact is citations. And so if your work is cited, it means that someone who's written another scientific article makes reference to something you wrote. And that's all tracked, and it's used for promotions, and it's used to judge scientific merit. It's its own science, citation tracking. A very small number of your published papers accrue most of the citations. So that's the first thing. So what that means is the more papers you publish, the more likely it is that one of them will become highly cited. And my highly cited papers aren't necessarily the ones that I thought would be most impactful. So but the other piece of information from literature on creativity is that the best predictor of quality, so you could index quality by impact, let's say, or by citations, is quantity.
Yeah.
It's not a great predictor, but it's the best one. And so, and this is good advice for everyone out there who's a musician or an artist. It's like, produce as much as you can, because you do get better at it, right?
You absolutely do, and so there's that, but there's also, I think the other important thing is to actually be true to yourself in your artistic endeavours, insofar as don't be trying to anticipate the zeitgeist, don't be trying to anticipate what other people are doing. My big concern in the current climate that we live in is that a lot of artists are choosing to self-censor because the penalty for risk-taking has got too high. You can be completely... I mean, if I think of an example
think about what kind of catastrophe that is, because we've already discussed the fact that the impediments to creativity are almost insurmountable. And so then you add an additional one, which is self-censorship because of social pressure. It's like, you just decimate the creative enterprise by doing
We
that.
wouldn't have anything. The Western canon would be decimated. It's ridiculous. I mean, an example I often think of is one of my favourite playwrights is Edward Albee, and when he came to write his play The Goat, which was a very controversial play because it was about a man having an affair, a sexual affair with a goat behind his wife's back, and obviously that doesn't sound palatable.
Well, at least he went behind his wife's back.
Exactly. At least it wasn't sort of an open, sort of paganistic thing. Absolutely, but I mean, it's a shocking play, and it's meant to be. It's about where our lines of tolerance are, where they lie, and why. And all of his friends told him, "Don't do this. You've got a valuable career, an incredible reputation. You're turning 80. You're 80. He was roughly 80 years old when this play came out." And they said, "You're just going to scupper everything." And he said that when he got that response, that's the reason he did it. He went out there and he put the play on, and it turned out to be a huge success. It won, I think, the Tony Award for Best Play. It was critically and commercially successful. It was absolutely massive. So it just goes to show, I think, to an extent, I mean, I'm not saying disregard feedback from other creative people or people who have suggestions. What I'm saying is, if you're true to your muse, whatever that is, the rewards will come, actually, or they are more likely to
Okay,
come.
so that brings us back to free speech, too, because, the problem with laws that abridge free speech is they abridge creative endeavor, and that's a terrible thing because it's the source of endless renewal. And it's the thing that fixes corrupt structures. And so to take aim at that is to take aim at the very process that would rescue you from the conundrum you are pretending to be obsessed by.
I mean, has there been any innovation, not just in artistic terms, but in scientific terms, without the risk of offence, without, I mentioned the example of Galileo in the book because, he caused a great deal of offence by.
Oh hell, Darwin offended himself so badly that he was sick. He was sick for like a decade because of the implications of what he'd thought up, which were thoroughly offensive to himself.
As they would be in with his belief system at the time, but that's the we can see in hindsight what we would have lost if people weren't willing to risk offending others. In fact, even what you said to Kathy Newman in that interview about you're risking being offensive by disagreeing with me now in this way. Like it's important to risk offending people. Because otherwise you just end up in this kind of this hive mind and for the arts it becomes utterly stultified. It becomes so boring when everything is predictable and everything is in line with a viewpoint and no one wants to. The art is the best way that we interrogate the complexities of humanity. I love what the filmmaker Lars von Trier, he said in an interview once that sometimes when he's making a film, he will take an indefensible moral position and attempt to defend it through the film, which I think is such a fascinating idea.
Dostoevsky did that all the time in his great novels, and so brilliant. I mean, that's what made Dostoevsky so staggeringly brilliant, was he would take positions that he despised with all his soul and make the people putting those beliefs forward the strongest characters in the book. I mean, he was so brave.
It's the best thing to do. I wrote a play once where it was a one-man play where I completely tried to embody the kind of person I despise. It was someone who relished watching acts of violence, and he would scour the internet for clips of real life violence. And it's something I can, whenever I've had that, whenever someone's tried to show me a beheading or something, I know I never want to see that kind of thing. I know I never want that in my head. And so I wanted to write a character who relished it, but from a position, from a non-judgmental position. I've never put that play on. I've written it, it's done. But the act of doing it was so incredibly liberating and interesting. And the idea that you can, you keep hearing this all the time, whenever a new film or a play comes out or a book, is this sending the right message? David Lynch's last series, the latest Twin Peaks series, was criticised. I read a review saying, well, there's violence against women in this, and he needs to be called out for this. Well, representing violence against women isn't an endorsement of violence against women. Maybe that's what the character does, and maybe we're supposed to hate him for it or whatever. Or if you read an autobiography of a complete reprobate, there can be something really interesting about that. And imagine all of this gone, all of this potential. But that is the end point of that's why I believe that this current social justice ideology is anti-art. I think it's opposed to the artistic spirit, quite fundamentally opposed to it, which is why I feel we must push back against it. Sorry, I
That's a
went off on
great place
one
to
there, but-
end. No,
Okay.
no, that's great. That's great. Well, thanks a lot, eh?
Yeah, thank
Much
you for having me.
appreciated. Yeah, it was a pleasure, and the time flew by, which is a good marker of a engaging exchange of free speech, let's say.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me, Jordan.
My pleasure. Good luck, eh?
Thank you.
The problem in the financial sector.
Oh, absolutely. If people had kept paying their mortgages, the securities would have been good, and we would have all lived happily ever after. Now the problem is that the politicians made the mortgages more risky by changing the rules. In other words, at one time, mortgages were considered the safest investment. This is for the widows and orphans who need their money coming in regularly.
I wrote a rule in my book. Put your house in perfect order before you complain about the world, before you criticize the world. Well, what's the idea? It's like, well, you're the sovereign, man. If the ship of state is listing and sinking, that's you. That's your problem. It's your fault. You're not doing it right. You're not educated enough. You're not awake enough. You're not articulated enough. You don't know enough about history. You're not taking on enough responsibility. You're looking for other people to blame because it's convenient. And that's kind of understandable because it's the dispersal of responsibility. Who wants all that responsibility? But there's a huge price to be paid for it. The first price that you pay for it is, well, there goes the adventure of your life. It's like you could get yourself together and be the bedrock of the state, right? That'd be hard. That'd call on everything that you have. That would be your adventure. You're gonna pass that off to someone else? And then what do? You've got nothing left in your life but triviality. And you can't live. I don't believe that people can live ethically, trivially. That's why I think the pursuit of the idea that life is for happiness is wrong. Because life is too difficult for that to be the case. Our lives are too profound, too characterized by suffering and malevolence. The world is too characterized by trouble at every level for happiness to be the proper solution. The solution is something like a heavy burden of ethical responsibility, the kind that sets the state straight. And then in that, you find the purpose of your life. And so not only, if you want the external monitoring and the surveillance state, not only do you sacrifice your privacy and invite all that invasive attention and lose your impulsive freedom, you lose everything that's profound about your life, and someone takes it from you. They take your destiny from you. And that's no way to live. That's the tyranny that we've struggled against in the West successfully for, I would say, in one way or another for a number of thousands of years, and with a substantial amount of success.
To draw Dave into this, we met in LA a couple of years ago over breakfast. Dave, you're a great defender of culture too. Now, when we met, it was very interesting. You set out the reasons, in a way, for me to think, here's a card-carrying progressive. You know, you told me where you came from and what you believed in, what you didn't, and then you said, and I'm a gay married man. And then you went on to say, and I thank God every day I live in Christian America. And I thought, that's a surprise turn in the conversation, and we had a fantastic breakfast talking about it. You're a defender of culture now, or of our cultural roots, at a time when the West seems to be its own worst enemy and doesn't believe in its cultural roots. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, of course. Well, first off, as you guys I'm sure know, Jordan and I just left the Sydney Opera House a few minutes ago, and we've done about 120 some odd shows where I've opened for Jordan, and it just struck me in the last 2 minutes that having to follow you is much less fun than having to go than having to go before you. That's easy. I'm usually just setting them up, and you're knocking them out of the park. But okay, I'll try. Well, just quickly on what Jordan said about the individual, because it links exactly to that. People ask me all the time in the Q&As and in our meet and greets, what is going on? Why is it that people are following this psychologist talking about lobsters all over the country? And actually, that question is what I believe is the answer. There has been a complete obliteration for young people to understand what being an individual is, what being a person that owns your own mind, that decides to get out there and live the life they're supposed to live, that doesn't want to take from somebody and give to somebody else or just take for themselves. And that has really been lost. And what's been amazing to me, as we've done now 20 some odd countries, is that the same things that you guys are thinking about in Sydney are the exact same things that people are thinking about in Toronto and Los Angeles and Stockholm and all over the country, and that's absolutely fascinating. So to your question, because I am an individual, that is what led me here. That's I think what led you to want to have breakfast with me in Los Angeles. That the differences, the immutable characteristics that we either have in common or separate us, whether it's sexuality or gender or skin color, are completely irrelevant. If we really want to be a society that is truly free, that truly respects each other, it makes no difference. I mean, I do when I go to colleges, I usually just single out somebody in the crowd, and it's like, how sad would it be if I just looked at you and I was like, oh, well, you're a white guy, you look like you're in your early 20s, as if that would give me any inclination, that I would have any insight into what you think or how you should think, actually, is the better point. Because you should think whatever you think and hopefully be willing to have that exchange of ideas. So I'm very appreciative that I live in a Christian country, because the simple fact is, while the media will imply that, every day there's another story on how evil Christian white people are or something like that. And by the way, I see that spreading all over the world as well. I mean, there's a weird thing going on with the media where I thought it was really an American crumbling of the media, but now I see it all over the place. I live in the freest country in the history of the world. Period. The United States in 2019 is the freest place in the history of the world. You can, with the most tiny exceptions on speech around, yelling fire in a crowded theater or a direct threat of violence, you can say whatever you want. And even being here in Australia, where you guys have it pretty good on speech, I can tell people are jealous of what America has. And certainly when we were in the UK, where they have all sorts of things, where, this YouTube creator, Count Dankula, had his dog, do the Nazi salute and got in all sorts of trouble. I mean, we won't have this forever, and that's very clear to me. And I would just add this, that Douglas Murray, who I'm sure you're familiar with in the UK, he's also gay, and he's a brilliant thinker. And I didn't even want to ask him anything about that, because it's completely irrelevant in a certain way. But the last question, when I had him on last time, I said to him, do you think your sexuality has a little something to do with your sensitivity about freedom? Because it might be you first. And he said that he thought his skin was a little thinner because of that. And so I do think that people that are on the outside, for whatever that is, it doesn't have to be sexuality, it could be obviously a myriad of different issues, I do think you become a little more sensitive to it. And for that reason, I'm incredibly, I'll go a step further. I am blessed that I live in the United States of America, and I'm a free man in the freest country ever, and I'm very appreciative of that.
You can see why we get on. Seriously. Can anyone push back against that? And yet half the time when you listen to the elites who have their hands on the levers of influence today, you would think we lived in cruel and oppressive cultures. Yeah. Think of the 4 great revolutions, the American, War of Independence and what came out of that. Think of the French Revolution. Think of the Russian Revolution. Think of the Maoist Revolution. Which one has produced a real understanding of the individual and secured their freedoms in a greater way? And we in Australia, of course, are unbelievably blessed, to use your word again, because we've inherited what's called a Washminster, the best of the British, our House of Congress, House of Representatives based on the House of Commons, Senate is closely modelled on yours, and it works unbelievably well. But you wouldn't think it, listening to the public commentary today. Now let's come to freedom. When you and I talked in Sydney back just before Easter last year, we had a great conversation, and to my enormous delight, I found that we had a friend in common, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. There you go, there's a photograph of him. Now, he doesn't look very happy, but there's a good reason for that. He would have been probably busted up physically and in all sorts of other ways as well when that photograph was taken. He was a hero in Russia in the Second World War, but after the war, he dared to disagree with the regime in Moscow, which was an unbelievably evil regime. And for the price for disagreeing was that he ended up in the Gulag, in a prison. This is a remarkable book. He wrote about his experiences. This wasn't the only one. It was smuggled out to the West. There's no doubt that his writings shortened the life of that evil regime. But the bit that...
Yeah, and we do the same thing in the capitalist, and the capitalist system does the same exact things. I'm not sure why you guys, either you're purposely lying or you don't understand or you're not able to step outside your own box and look at it, because a nation of laws, being a nation of laws like we are in the United States, you're claiming that we're free when we're the freest country. We get to use those words that we're free. We get to use the terminology, we're free. Where in a communist country you would not be able to say that you're free. Does not mean that we're free. We're never free. We enslaved ourselves. We bought into the propaganda, and if you're going to live your life by any one of your choices of lies, they're still all lies. It's amazing to me when I'm listening to all these highly intelligent people, nice people, good people. They seemingly, you know. And they're selling the capitalist idea as if it was based on any reality, and it's not. It never was. The newspapers programmed us for many years on what to think and what to do. We bought into every false flag the United Nations put out for us, along with the United States along the way. You know, the same way the European Union did with Europe. In order to direct us. In other words, we were directed by fear, we were directed by anger, directed by happiness. All of our emotions came into play with it all. And to pretend that we didn't know this was going to happen is also very strange, because you guys read all the books that told us that this was all going to go down this way and how it was going to go down. And then you name off all these bad guys from the past who we stole their ideas and applied them to something that we just changed the name of, and we call it capitalism. So therefore it's not called Maoism, and therefore, or it's not called Marxism, or it's not called communism, so therefore it's capitalism, and that means it's a good thing because of the name, because everything that's derived around it, everything, there's just too many to list. There's just too much to go down the line. You have to, which you should do, but I ain't gonna fucking do it. I ain't got the time. I'll mention little shit here and there, like for example, just talking about this one subject, gambling. Okay, so gambling is illegal for everybody, and except governments are okay for gambling, right? Then they come up with certain states that they will allow the Native Indians to have casinos, or they'll create a state like Las Vegas that it's legal, and this way different mafias and mobs can participate in gambling, which would be illegal everywhere else. You know, as far as Las Vegas goes, you're not going to see poor people go in there to gamble, right? It's not going to happen. They're gambling on every fucking corner, scratching scratch tickets, playing mega bucks, playing mega millions, all this kind of crap. So we can make gambling illegal, but it's not really illegal, is it? Um, Alcohol, marijuana, they make put prohibition in place. United States has been a total fuck show, man. To say that we have the rights to do anything is just nonsense. It's not true. It's not fucking true. Unless you're gonna play by one rule or another, unless you're gonna play by one side or the other, the places where we get all of our ideas in the memory capsule that we store these ideas in, they're never our own ideas. When we're seeing, that's why it was so hard when I started seeing the system for what it was. It was so hard to get around. But I did have 10 years or more before finding the system of knowing that everything was lies. Couldn't prove it. Now I can. Now I can prove that it was all lies. And so can anybody that's coming to these videos. So why not go look? Why not just go look and see it for yourself? Don't bother arguing with me. I'm an idiot. Don't argue with idiots. Go look at the system for yourself. And when you see it, you'll start to understand it. And then you'll be coming to me and saying, holy fuck, you're right. We're all lies. Liars, you know? No big deal. We'll move on. We can move on. But not by the lies. We should not move on. Free country, my ass.
He noticed too that prisoners who became guards were often more
Free to believe in our religions, free to fight in our wars, free to kill yourself, free to eat our poisons, free to drink our poisons, free to give up your children and your families to us, free to, giving up your kids. I mean, that's nothing new. To act like that's something new, that's nothing new. You were putting our children in war and in harm's way over nonsense, over lies for all these years. I didn't hear anybody complaining about it. I still don't hear anybody really complaining about it. It's just another way to break up the family, take out the father, take out the sons, the children, and the boys, get rid of the boys. And here you are, Jordan Peterson, worried about the men and the boys and how they're getting fucked. They were always getting fucked. Even under the capitalist system, the boys were always getting fucked. When they wanted to increase the population after a war or something like that, they put out the propaganda to boost everybody up, and everybody's having sex and having babies. You make birth control illegal, no more birth control. Don't have no more consideration for when you're going to have sex. That would be the best birth control is, celibacy is the best way. And what did we do with all that? We fucked it all up. We brought in the pill. We started poisoning the girls.
Incredible people to blame, especially both of them at the same time. And yet he started to consider, what did I do in my own life that increased the probability that I ended up here? As a citizen, for example, who was responsible for the way that the country operated. Because, like in East Germany, 1/3 of the people in East Germany were informers. And everybody in the Soviet system lied about everything to everyone all the time, which is, of course, what you would do if 1 in 3 people were informers, because that would be like 2 people in your family. And so the whole system was set up and maintained because everyone lied. You think, well, if I stop lying, I'm done for. It's like, yeah, fair enough, man, but if you keep lying, and so does everyone else, you're also done for, and so is everyone else. So that doesn't seem to be much of an option. And Solzhenitsyn noted that there were people, even under these extreme circumstances, that would tell the truth, and he decided that he would go over his life with a fine-tooth comb. He had nothing but time to think about every time he had acted in some manner in his life that transgressed against his own conscience, right? Where he did something he knew to be wrong, and then to see if he could figure out how to set it right then. Now, obviously, he couldn't necessarily apologize to the people against who he had transgressed, right? Sometimes you have to pay for something you did in a currency other than that which you took. And his determination was to chronicle his experiences in as truthful a manner as possible, which was basically impossible. It wasn't like he had paper and pencil and time to write and privacy. Had his notebooks ever been discovered, well, he would have been in serious trouble and they would have been destroyed. In fact, when he got out, he had 2 copies of the full manuscript, each out to a different typist. Secretly, the KGB got a hold of one, destroyed it, and the typist committed suicide. So he basically memorized the book, and it's 2,400 pages long of 8-point type. Like it's one remarkable work. It's one long scream of truthful outrage, and that came out of his decision to set himself right. And then it was, as John said, it was smuggled into the West, where it had a walloping impact. It completely demolished, at least for a long while, the moral credibility of communism. Completely. From like 1972 on, if you knew about the existence of the Gulag Archipelago, you didn't get to say anything good about communism. And that lasted for a long time. It even convinced French intellectuals that there was something wrong with communism. And there's no doubt that it was one of the historical events that caused the Soviet Union to collapse. And that was a good thing. And it collapsed relatively peacefully, all things considered. No thermonuclear war. Yugoslavia was no picnic. And, but for the demise of one of the most evil empires that ever existed, it was pretty damn smooth. And certainly the world's been in way better shape, especially Africa, since the Soviet Union has disappeared. Because the African economies are booming like mad now, and it's partly because they aren't doing things that are insanely foolish under the guidance of communist direction. And so Solzhenitsyn decided, under these conditions of absolute powerlessness and privation, right, to put himself together and to say.
That's so funny because what they do now is they put themselves under capitalism, right? They're Africa. So how is it better? Where is it better? You still have the same slavery. You talked about it before in earlier videos. You still have the same slavery going on in Africa, Haiti, other areas, right? You still got the same totalitarian system in Australia. That never changed since the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? So we moved over to capitalism in these other places, democracy, if you want to call it, a republic, trying to turn them into republics or whatever. It's the same thing. I see the same shit happening. Fucking ridiculous, man. But here you are saying it got better.
And your truth and your ability to communicate. And that's what's supposed to set the state straight. Okay, so you have that. It's like, well, then maybe it's truth that you're pursuing and seeking, if you have any sense. And what's truth? Well, truth is the best reflection you can manage of reality. Imperfect, because you're imperfect, but it's the best you've got. It's like, what's going to be better for you than to have reality on your side? And what's going to stand in your way if you have reality on your side? Lies? I don't think so. That isn't how it works. And I don't think anyone believes that, because the other thing I've noted and discussed with people frequently is if you have someone that you love, a child, let's say, and you're trying to raise a child in a decent manner, you don't tell them, look, kid, this is how the world runs. Everything's corrupt beyond belief, including you and your parents and society and nature, for that matter. It's just complete bloody hell everywhere. And the only possible way that you can make it through life effectively is to learn to lie as brilliantly and undisguisedly as possible. No one does that. Well, why not? If you believed in falsehood, if you believed that that was the way forward, then that would be the right thing to teach. But you don't. You teach your children to tell the truth, even if it's painful. And the reason for that is that you actually believe in the power of the truth. I'll finish that with one thing. There's a very interesting scene in Revelations. There's a very strange document appended to the end of the primary book in the Western canon, right? And it's a hallucinogenic nightmare, Revelation. And in it, Christ comes back to earth, and he's not the merciful savior of the Gospels. He's the judge. And there's a reason for that. Psychological reason. And the reason is that if you have an ideal, and whatever Christ is, metaphysically or psychologically, he's an ideal. If you have an ideal is a judge, because the ideal judges you, right? Okay, so he comes back as a judge. He has a sword in his mouth, and he judges the saved and the damned, and it's not pretty. But here's something interesting. It's so fascinating. He saves his worst contempt and uses contemptuous language. He says, I will spit you out of my mouth. It really means I will vomit you out of my mouth. Not if you were a bad person. Not if you were a good person. Not if you were a bad person. But if you sat on the bloody fence. Right? If you were neither warm nor cold. You wanted to play it both ways. Well, I'll lie when it's in my favor, and I'll tell the truth when it's expedient for me. It's like you're in the category of the damned. And I think that's absolutely right, because that's real cowardice. If you
This is the stuff I love about you.
good, get on with it, man. You can be a
Most of the
criminal
stuff you
and
say,
hang your life up and
I'm
see
in
how
love
that
with you.
works. And if you believe in truth, well, then perhaps you put yourself on the line for the truth.
Because I would never
But you don't
memorize all
play
this,
the-
and it's nice
the
to
two
hear.
sides against the middle, because there's nothing in that isn't self-serving at the cost of your own well-being and at the cost of everyone else's. So you have to think about your relationship with the truth. You know, there isn't anything more important that you can do than that, and because I've seen
Which one turns it
people
on?
in major
It's on. You gotta
corporations
just turn on the thing.
corrupt
No, it's
and
not.
failing.
Huh?
Spend
Is this on?
3 years
Okay,
doing nothing
yeah,
but
no, it's
telling
on.
the truth.
Oh no, turn
Often at their own
the
peril.
black one.
Fix the companies. And it's such a relief to the people that they were
Yeah,
talking to,
the way
because they
that it
will
moves.
talk to them. The company's run by people
There
who
it
are
goes.
not doing what they should be doing. And they're questioning. It's like, okay, well, what's really going on here? Well, no one wants to talk because they're afraid, but the person who's doing the questioning actually wants to know, and people start opening up, and he gathers information. It's like, oh, I see, here's the real problems here. It's like, we've got all sorts of problems here. This is why the company's in trouble. But it's okay. If we know the problems, well, then we can fix them, and we'll go ahead and fix them, and then the company will work. And everybody who's terrified and won't say anything and isn't really working hard anymore because they're so dispirited and believing that the projects are corrupt and that the leadership isn't doing what it's supposed to, they start having a bit of hope. It's like, really? I mean, you're actually willing to admit that that is the problem, and you're going to give me a problem that is a real problem that I can actually work on and actually solve and benefit from that? And the whole company switches around. And that works. It's not naive to believe that. And I'll say one more thing about trust that's very much worth knowing. So, this is what you learn if you're a clinician. Most people who trust are naive. And naive is not a virtue. It's a fault. It's partly a fault because if you're naive and you run into someone who's malevolent, including you, they might do you incalculable damage so that you will never recover. So that's not a good thing. You don't want to be naive. If you're not naive, that means you've been burned once or twice or 3 or 4 times. And you know, once you've been burned in that manner, well, then it's hard to trust. Because you think, well, why would I trust you, or me for that matter, knowing full well that I can be betrayed? And so then you're cynical. And you think that's an improvement over being naive. You know, you're more mature, cynical than you are naive, even if it's premature, and it's often premature in young people. It's like, okay, so how do you get out of that conundrum? Well, this is a crucial thing to know. You trust people because you're courageous. That's why. It's the same reason that you're grateful. It's a mark of courage. It's a mark of commitment. It's like, you and I, we're going to make an agreement, and you're full of snakes, and so am I. And there's lots of ways this can go sideways. But we're going to put together an agreement. We're going to articulate it out. We're going to try to find something that is of mutual benefit to both of us. We're going to put our hands out and shake, and we're going to try to stick to that. And we're going to risk trusting each other, right? It's a risk. And that's the risk upon which the state is based, really. Like, I believe, and I think the evidence for this is very strong, by the way. I don't think that there is any other natural resource than trust. And for trust, you need courage, not naivety. And you've got to overcome your cynicism so that you trust. And then you ask yourself, too, if you don't trust your institutions, it's like, hey, they're your institutions. Why don't you go out and do something about them? You think, well, I can't. It's like, that's not true. That is absolutely not true. There's nothing vaguely accurate about that in a society like this. Almost all of our democratic institutions are crying out for people to participate. They can't find enough people to do it. And if you participate and you do it diligently and you have your say and you're careful and trustworthy and you speak your mind, you can have way more effect than you think. So if you're cynical about the institutions, it's like look in the mirror. Because those institutions, the corruption of those institutions is a direct reflection of your inability to get your act together. And that's what it means to be a sovereign part of the Western community. So it's not someone else. So
This issue of trust. Now, I would have thought that after what he'd been through, and you've outlined it, not alone by any means, but some of these people who have warned us of the need to be responsible and to heed history. Solzhenitsyn is a classic example. What has happened? You made the point that for a very long time we understood how dangerous that sort of drift towards totalitarianism is. It seems to have washed out of the system now. It seems as though we don't teach history, we don't respect it, we don't understand that it can teach us valuable lessons. And what worries me about that is the old saying, if you don't understand history, you may very well repeat it. Why do we walk away from people we can trust, warning us?
Because you were giving us false history the whole time. That's why.
There's an interesting reason for that that sort of brings this.
If you would have been giving us truth and reality, then
which is that
history would have been fine.
truly oppressed.
But you
This
and
was
the
all
other
like
sides all gave us
actual
false history.
oppression, right? Now we have people that are walking around.
So now they're tearing it all down. The other side, not you. The other side's tearing it all down. And you're just assisting. They're going to be the negative and you're going to be the positive because you're a conservative. But really, you're all in it together.
Beyond imagination of what people could only dream of 2 generations ago, even 1 generation ago, especially with this, that people now have a perceived oppression instead of a real oppression. So one of the things that I find when I go to college campuses is that these kids will protest